Morning. So, I hope everyone had a good weekend. If you remember, at the end of last week, we were doing some work with brainstorming a story. Today, I want to go one step further with our story and work on a story draft. So, you're going to look at this brainstorm a story assignment and the work that you submitted for that. I want you to use it to complete this story draft. When I open this assignment, you're going to see the following instructions. Use the story brainstorm 1113 to write a draft or a short story. Answer the following questions in order to create the draft of your story. Write it in complete sentences. How does your story begin? What is the problem? How is the problem resolved? And how does your story end? So what I mean by that is, if we go back here and look at my examples, I had the following questions that I answered as well. When you were brainstorming a story, you answered who is in your story, and I answered Whitney Houston, her cat, and an astronaut. You also answered what happens in your story. What's the problem? I said that Whitney Houston, her cat, and the astronaut became trapped in space. How does the problem get solved? I said the cat hits a button to send them back to Earth. Where does the story take place? My story takes place on Earth and in space. When does the story take place? In 1994. So that is the brainstorm assignment from last week. And those are all the questions I had you answer. And in this case, these are how I answered the questions. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take this information and you're going to use it to draft a story. So I'm going to have a couple questions to help you. Again, these questions are going to be, how does your story begin? What is the problem? How is the problem resolved? And how does the story end? So in my case, what I'm going to do here, perfect. What I'm going to do here is I have on this side the questions from my brainstorm, and I'm going to simply take the information from it and use it to answer the story draft questions. So how does my story begin? Well, my story begins in 1994 with Whitney Houston and her cat walking home when they meet an astronaut and decide to get coffee with him. What is the problem? Well, I'm going to look at this question, what is the problem? And I'm going to say, in a little more detail now, that while they're drinking coffee, a new spaceship launches from Cape Canaveral and accidentally beams them up. Before they know it, they are trapped in outer space. How is the problem resolved? Well, Whitney Houston and the astronaut panic. The cat jumps on the control panel and hits a button that takes them back to Earth. How does the story end? The story ends with Whitney Houston, the cat, and the astronaut back in the coffee shop, finishing their coffee and agreeing never to go to space again. So you see how in the brainstorm assignment from last week, I gave some very short, basic answers to these questions about my story to kind of get my ideas flowing. Now in the story draft, I'm taking these 4 questions, and I'm answering them in more detail. How does the story begin? Well, I'm gonna set it up. Instead of simply just having some basic ideas, I'm gonna set it up and describe how the story begins. I'm gonna say who's in it. I'm gonna say when and where it takes place. What's the problem? Well, when I brainstormed, I simply said the problem was they became trapped in space. This time I'm going to write it like a story. I'm going to say, well, how exactly did they become trapped in space? Well, they became trapped in space because while they were drinking coffee, a new spaceship launched and kind of sucked them up, and then they were trapped in space. So I'm giving a little bit more detail. I'm using the information from my brainstorm, I'm adding more detail to it, and I'm answering these questions. So this is what you're going to do in your assignment today. I want you to answer it either in a document, in a Google Drive doc, or in the text entry on this assignment. You can submit it to me by hitting submit and attaching your story, or by sharing your Google Drive document with me. I'll be looking for your work. If you have any questions, please let me know. I look forward to reading what you come up with.